and it so happened that the law enforcement decided to put the bonfire out, so they sent in the firemen, escorted by National Guardsmen, and they put the fire out. And apparently, during that time, an officer got hit in the head with a piece of wood, I suspect it was. That's what they said it was. And there was probably about 10 or 15 minutes after that it was just the darkness turned to light as the police opened fire. 9 highway patrolmen and 1 local police officer firing rifles and shotguns and pistols. And it was just, I mean, it was a shock to many of the students that there was no bullhorns, no whistles, no anything that indicated that this kind of extremely lethal action would be taken on these students. And the numbers that were actually wounded go much higher than the 30. Many of the students chose not to go to the hospital, and so their injuries were not recorded. But it also had an impact, making more victims on other students who were there on the campus and actually witnessed what had gone on. Certainly the parents of those students who didn't know what was going on were notified that there had been a shooting and several students killed. It was just chaos at that point. The state of South Carolina then indicated that there was an exchange of gunfire, that the students were off the campus. They fabricated a situation that ended up going out to the press. And the press was able to discern that the information that was sent out was erroneous, and some of the major newspapers made retractions, but the retractions came like 3 weeks later. But the AP, which reported it all across the country, didn't even address that until probably about 2003, in which they said that there was some misinformation in the state distorted what had actually happened.
Cleveland Sellers, I'd like to ask you about that particular point, because I remember I was a young student at Columbia University at the time, and I distinctly remember this tiny little item in the back pages of the New York Times about the Orangeburg Massacre. It was, when you compare it to the kinds of reports that we get today about students opening fire on university campuses or even the Kent State, it was almost a non-event in the national press.
That's correct. Absolutely. And part of that was the way the information was released about what took place. It was just a clear case of the police opening fire without any provocation. There was no exchange of gunfire. The students were unarmed, and what precipitated it was the fact that the students on that Monday night went down to the bowling alley to try to bowl. And on Tuesday night, when they went down, they were arrested. And at that point, you know, the state had kind of in mind a kind of Watts ride. And so they began to gear up. And on the night of February the 8th, it probably was 300 law enforcement officers in Orangeburg. And that included the FBI and Army intelligence and the National Guards, the local and state police. So it was kind of an armed camp there. There were so many police that they could actually have walked on the campus and arrested every student on the campus. One officer could have gone over and arrested all the students who were on the campus.
And how did you, then you ended up being the only person arrested and imprisoned for this?
I was the only person arrested, and I was arrested on the night of February the 8th, but when I got to court, my charges were changed from the felony charges that I was arrested on to an incident that allegedly took place on February the 6th. So I was not even tried for any act of criminal act on the night of of February the 8th. My charges, the charges that I was found guilty on, and the only testimony of any kind of evidence was by a law enforcement officer who alleged that on that Tuesday night, February the 6th, that I got on top of a fire truck, flicked a cigarette lighter, a Bic, and said, "Burn, baby, burn." None of that happened, but that was the way that the state made an effort to save face for the tragedy that occurred in Orangeburg on February the 8th.
Professor Cleveland Sellers, you were pardoned 23 years later?
I was pardoned in 1993.
By who?
It was a probation pardon board of the state of South Carolina.
Your feelings about that?
Well, it was certainly a relief, because if you can imagine that the charges, felony charges, assault on a police officer and riot, stayed on my record, and that was used as a way to as disinformation and a part of the effort to undermine civil rights workers during that period of time. That went on for a long period of time, and when I applied for jobs, that would come up, and in many instances I was turned down for jobs that I was certainly qualified for.
Dr. Sellers,
it also impacted my going to school too. So it was the pardon released some of that and relieved some of that, and so that, in that sense, it was for me it was a bit of relief, but it did not address the issues of what happened in Orangeburg completely.
Dr. Sellers, finally, as we continue our 1968, 40 years later series, right. You knew Dr. King well. Tomorrow, of course, we'll be doing an hour-long special on this 40th anniversary of his assassination. But your final thoughts today?
Well, my final thoughts today is that it's ironic that here we are 40 years later, and the issue of poverty and the issues of war are still issues that are pertinent all around America again, and I think that it just says that in 1968, with the assassination of Dr. King and with the decline in the civil rights movement during that period, that a number of issues were left unachieved, and so it is, I mean, incumbent upon Americans to, like Barack Obama suggested, have that discussion about race and begin to address those issues of poverty and the issue of the war. Those are issues that are still there. Those are issues that I'm convinced that Dr. King would be interested in seeing addressed. He certainly sacrificed his life, along with others in the movement who sacrificed their lives to address the issues of poverty and address the issues of the war in Vietnam.
Speaking of Vietnam, we're going to move to our last segment now, looking back at the Tet Offensive, as well as this week, the significance of Lyndon Johnson pulling out of the Democratic primary in '68. Dr. Cleveland Sellers, we want to thank you very much for being with us. The only person jailed for the events at the Orangeburg Massacre, in which 3 students were killed by police and scores of others wounded, now Director of African American Studies program at the University of South Carolina. When we come back, Vietnam, stay with us.